My inner value of money is slipping. We've all heard of lifestyle creep, but I'm wondering if there's a similar concept for how much you value money in your head. I've tried to stay at around the same fixed cost of living for the past 8 years, 3K per month. In that same time frame, my income has more than tripled. While my general quality of life has roughly remained the same, and I have more money saved up than ever before, I've noticed a concerning trend where the minimum purchase value limit in my head has gone way up. What do I mean by that? 8 years ago, if I wanted to buy something for $200, I'd have to really sleep on it before I pulled the trigger. Today, the minimum limit probably closer to $500. Even when you account for inflation, the amount has doubled. This is really concerning because I'm worried that number will continue to go up as my net worth increase. Are there any ways to mitigate this inflation of value in my head, or is this an expected outcome of becoming more financially secure? Is this why some rich people can drop $10,000 without blinking an eye? Curious if anyone else here has experienced the same feeling. Well, here's the thing that people need to understand, right? The only thing that really matters when it comes to spending your money, like literally the only thing that really matters, is basically staying within like a ratio, right? If you keep the ratios the same, your quality of life will increase. The things that you tend to enjoy will increase, right? But you're not really spending out of hand, right? You might like think back and like, wait a minute, like I feel like I'm spending way too much money. And for you, 8 years ago, that might be the case. But you, 8 years to the present right now, you're like, actually, no, wait a minute, I can't afford this, right? Like, this literally doesn't like financially change my situation like at all. Like, another way to view it, if you were making like, let's say, like $20,000 a year after tax 10 years ago, right? Well, the amount of money that you were spending back then on like what you ate, what you like spent your money on for fun, right, is going to be very different than like what you might be spending on today when you're potentially making, who knows, like $50,000 now, $80,000 now, $100,000 now. Like, it's going to change over time. Inflation has nothing to do with this. The only reason why this tends to happen as time goes on, especially if you're someone who just naturally doesn't like to spend, is that you're going to get into a situation where, like, mentally, you start caring so much about the little things, right? Because, like, think about it. It turns into like a time sink in your like mental capacity, right? So, for example, when you're barely making any money, right? You might be very against maybe paying someone to clean your house, right? Because you're like, why would I pay someone to clean my house? Why would I pay someone to do my yard work, right? Like, you might be thinking that, right? But when you start making more and more and more money, then you start to realize, like, wait a minute, my potential time is worth way more than what I would potentially pay someone to do this on my behalf. And I don't even have to think about it, right? So, for example, you could literally have like a recurring expense every month for like yard work and cleaning your house, so that basically you just never ever think about it. But you could literally be spending like $500 more per month than what you were spending 10 years ago because you did it all yourself. But you also spent all of that time doing that back then. Right? Like, that's something that people need to understand too. Like, what you end up doing day to day is going to change as well, not just your spending. Like, what you're going to be doing on a day to day basis, your daily habits, etc., your interests will change. But as long as like the ratio of like what you spend your money on stays the same, then it doesn't really matter, right? So, for example, there's a lot of different ratios out there. Let me pull up one. So, ratio for budgeting, right? You can use any like ratio for this, but I just want to use it as like an example. So the 50-30-20 budget rule. So the 50-30-20 budget rule is a popular method for personal money management and wealth creation. It advises people to save 20% of their income every month, leaving 50% for needs, which I think personally that's a bit too high, including essentials like mortgage or rent and food. The remaining 30% is for discretionary spending. However, the percentages may need to be adjusted to fit individual circumstances, such as living in a high cost area where housing is blah 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 blah. The rule can help build more structure into spending habits and make it easier to reach financial goals, such as saving up for a rainy day or paying off debt. So, budget categories can also be used, such as 10 to 20% for insurance, 10 to 15% for food, 10 to 15% for savings, 10 to 15% for transportation, 5 to 10% for personal, 5 to 10% for recreation, 5 to 10% for utilities, and 1 to 5% for giving, and 25 to 30% for housing. Like personally, I think like you shouldn't really go higher than 25% for housing because you don't want to be house poor, you don't want to be car poor, etc. But just like think about it for like this example. So it was what 20, oh no, 30% for discretionary spending. Let's just use that as an example. So pulling up a calculator. So let's say that 8 years ago, you after tax, you were bringing in $20,000 a year, right? We're just going to use this as an example, right? So we times that by 30%, which means that we were spending $6,000 a year on discretionary spending. Basically, it's just spending money on whatever we want, right? Now, like 8, 10 years to today, whatever, right? We're still going to be using that same 30%, right? But we're going to be using, let's say, like an income of 80,000 after tax, right? So times point, okay, so 30%. So now we were spending previously 6,000 a year on just random nonsense that we wanted to spend. Drinking, going out, playing games, whatever, right? Now, with our current income, same ratio of the 30%, we're now spending 24,000 a year on literally just random stuff, right? But it's the same impact on our overall financial situation, but the actual dollar amount is way different, right? So let's see what 24,000 divided by 6 is 4. So that's 4 times what you were spending previously. Like that's a pretty massive jump. And if you were to like take a step back or if you were to like reflect on it, you're going to be like, wait a minute. I spent 24 grand at the grocery store or something, like just like for like random stuff. Oh, wait, I spent 24 grand on this. Wait, I spent 10 grand on this like random watch that I wanted. Like you start to think about it like at the like dollar amount and you're like, "Oh, what am I doing? How am I spending all this type of money?" But it's still within the ratio of your spending. So you're not like going out of hand, but the person does have a point where when you start making more and more and more money, the ratios almost feel insane. Like the actual dollar amount from that same ratio seems like absolutely insane. So to put it into perspective, let's say that you were clearing $1 million after tax, right? So let's see, $1 million times the 30%, right? Now you could potentially spend $300,000 on basically whatever you want, but it would still have the same impact that you were spending back when you were only making 20 grand a year after tax. That 6,000 that you were spending, that's the same impact on your finances to now when you're spending potentially $300,000 on random stuff. You could literally buy 2 pre-owned Lamborghinis with that amount, maybe 3. Like just to put into perspective. That's why, like that person said, and or kind of hinted at, this is the reason why when you start making way more money, you start getting to the point where, like, okay, I'm willing to spend more money for the added benefit of time, right? If I could save an hour a week by not cutting my grass, that might be worth it. If I could basically like save 2 hours a week in terms of like cleaning a house, that might be worth it. Oh, like if you have a pool, maybe spending, well, maybe saving, I don't know, like 3 hours a month might be worth it, spending that actual amount. So it's just something to really think about. Like it gets to the point where the ratio, even though it's the same, the dollar amount that comes from that ratio is so insane that you start going down the path of having this lifestyle creep in terms of dollar amounts to the point where you almost don't even recognize yourself because you're like, whoa, wait, I spent how much money on coffee this year? Wait, I spent how much money on cars this year? Wait, I spent how much money on clothing this year? But if you were to really just break it down, you're still within reason because you're still within that ratio. It's just something to think about. Like, that's why whenever you try to like create a budget or whenever you try to basically figure out your spending, don't go based off of the dollar amount, go based off the ratio. Choose the ratio and stay with that ratio over time, because then you could basically be always in a situation where you're never going to be living paycheck to paycheck, and you're always going to be investing towards your future, and you're always going to have an emergency fund, and you're going to be debt free forever, right? So you're going to have your finances always in check by keeping the ratio, because you're not going to screw yourself by making a dumb financial choice because you're staying within a healthy ratio. It's just the dollar amounts are just going to start to freak you out. Like you're going to basically not almost like recognize yourself at all, right? Like, I mean, if you started off with like a beat up Honda Civic, but now your daily is like a Lamborghini, yeah, it's going to feel pretty weird, right? Or if you started with a Honda Civic that's like 20 years old, back when you were like 16, but now you're driving like a brand new, I don't know, brand new Mercedes AMG, right? That's like what, 2 grand of a pre-owned car when you were 16 to now brand new. You got like nearly like a $60,000 car. Yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy when you really think about it, but still within reason.